I've worked with enough nonprofit boards to notice a pattern. Some boards are force multipliers. They ask the hard questions. They open doors the CEO can't. They show up when things fall apart. They make the work easier, not harder. But other boards are an anchor. They second-guess operations they don't understand. They demand reports that they don't read. They shut down smart investments in the name of financial responsibility. And what I've learned is that the difference isn't about finding wealthy donors or well-connected people. It's about design. Because most nonprofit boards are set up to fail. Board members don't have clear expectations about their role or responsibilities, or where they have influence and where they don't. They aren't trained on the very real skills required to sit on a governance board. And they're shoved into systems that are built in good faith, but that don't allow them to bring their best strengths to the table. But when you actually design a board with the same intentionality you'd bring to building a product or shaping a strategy, that's when everything changes. Because building a highly functional nonprofit board might be the single most important thing you can do to build a sustainable social impact organization. It might even determine whether your organization can actually deliver on its mission. To explore what designing effective nonprofit boards looks like in practice, I wanted to talk with Rob Acton. Rob founded Cause Strategy Partners 11 years ago after serving as a nonprofit CEO and watching boards either multiply impact or drain resources. Since then, he's placed over 3,000 board members across 1,500 nonprofit organizations. He wrote a book, Becoming a Causey, a roadmap for effective board service, and he's spent a decade figuring out exactly what separates boards that work from boards that don't. I'm Eric Ressler, and this is Designing Tomorrow. And now, my conversation with Rob Acton. Rob Acton, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be with you, Eric. Thanks for the opportunity to chat. Always enjoy a chat with you.
So I'm really excited today to dive into all things nonprofit boards, specifically governance boards. And I'll start by saying we've had a lot of board exposure working with social impact organizations and our clients. And, I'd be lying if I didn't say that we often look at the board as a barrier to getting good work out the door, which I say carefully and intentionally, and not with disrespect, but it's been a challenge for us. And I think we've seen it often has to be a challenge for our clients as well, where the board feels like this invisible hand that has influence in sometimes not a very constructive way. But I've also learned through working with you and through studying the work that you do that there is a better way, and that a board can also be an incredible asset for organizations. And I've seen that firsthand too. So what I'd love to start with is to just get your opinions and your perspectives and your experience around what is it that makes a nonprofit board constructive and helpful and a force for good instead of something that feels more like a barrier for social impact organizations.
Yeah, I appreciate the comment. And in fact, that's probably one of the core motivators of why I launched Cause Strategy Partners 11 years ago. The same experience. I'd served as a nonprofit CEO for 11 years and really had the opportunity to see what it looks like when you have the right people in the right seats who understand the role and are doing the role, and how that multiplies a leader's opportunity to drive mission impact versus a board where, you don't have the right board, or they don't understand the role, or they're simply not showing up and getting it done, and how that actually becomes a net drain on the organization. And I can't think of anything worse than a nonprofit organization. We don't operate around the edges of society. We're taking care of homelessness, we're taking care of kids, we're taking care of the sick, we're looking after the environment. And to have a board that's actually draining resources instead of contributing to the organization, it's just not appropriate. So it's my passion. I think that very quickly, top of mind elements of a great board. One, high expectations have been set. And we're not embarrassed to say this is a real set of commitments, a meaningful amount of your time, a meaningful amount of your resources, a meaningful ask to open your network to the organization that you're serving, a meaningful contribute of the core talents that you bring to the board. I've seen people apologize for their roles and responsibilities and expectations, and that makes me sad. No, there's no apology. You're stepping into a role where you'll be one of 10, 12, 15, 16, 18 people shepherding, leading, guiding this important work. And so here's our set of expectations for what that looks like. I think that's fundamentally key. Second thing, and it is kind of the theme of today's session, right? Designing that board. Don't, just sort of like, who do we know? Does anybody have a friend who might want to serve on our board? But really being thoughtful around what is the right mix of backgrounds, experiences, skill sets, industries that we need represented in these strategic conversations, that we need represented as we drive resources into the organization, and really designing that board instead of letting board development happen to you. You drive the board development work. And then I think if I were to say a third thing, great boards are well trained, and great boards have a culture that they invest in. It's not a group of strangers who just sort of show up at 4 meetings a year. A great board really invests in becoming a team. They know one another, they trust one another, they communicate with each other. I chair a board, Broadway Inspirational Voices, and we have 2 meetings a year, and we take the first hour at those in-person meetings, literally says on the agenda, board culture time. And we're engaging with one another around fun activities, go around questions, getting to know one another types of activities, because it matters that you really are a team and that you're a unit.
So I'd love to dig in a little bit more about something that you said that's a little bit surprising to me around, like, you shouldn't apologize to the board for setting a big ask, essentially. And I know that what's interesting to me about that is that it does feel like, the board positions are often volunteer positions or unpaid positions. I would say in 95% of cases for nonprofits, if not more. And so what I've experienced also is that it can be hard for younger professionals who don't have the means to dedicate extra time and energy to show up and do that volunteer work, especially in a meaningful way, especially when oftentimes there's a spoken or unspoken expectation that part of the role of being on a board is to give money or to open your networks. And yet there's also this drive, and I think this is really core to your work as well, around making sure that boards aren't just a bunch of old, rich white people, to put it bluntly. So how do you manage those two sometimes contradictory scenarios?
I think the nonprofit sector is really shifted over the last decade. I've been in this work 11 years in terms of actually driving, board members to nonprofit organizations. And I think there's a lot more awareness around what a strong board looks like. I don't see a lot of organizations anymore that are really, like, who can write the biggest check, and those are the only people that we're interested in for this board. I think there's a lot of awareness that diversity matters. And when I say diversity, I mean across a range of spectrums.
Yeah.
Racial and ethnic diversity, of course, matters. And that has been an area where the nonprofit sector is traditionally really fallen behind in terms of the look at the community, the organization serving, and then their board. And it's not reflective of the community, and we have to change that. But there's many other aspects of identity, of course, gender and sexual identity and living with disabilities and the like, age. And then we need to look at skill set, and then we need to look at industry. And sometimes we need to look at geography if the organization's serving multiple geography, and life experience, I should say, and being thoughtful around building that board that will serve our organization well is what matters. We need money to run nonprofits. Eric, I know you're keenly aware of that as much as I am, but that won't get you the whole way. And I think when a board has sort of delegated everything else to the CEO and their team and said, okay, we'll just raise money, they've really lost track of their core responsibilities, right? Boards shape strategy. Boards ensure that strategy is coming to life. Boards leverage their core skill sets in the boardroom to make wise decisions in a complex operating environment, and frankly, sometimes in crisis. And then boards provide fiduciary oversight, financial sustainability, and managing the CEO's efforts and the like. And so it's about much more than writing that big check. And I'm happy to say I've really seen acceptance of that reality. That said, it doesn't happen automatically. And that's the work, as you know, that we do at Cause Strategy Partners, that we help organizations get well outside of their existing network and find talented professionals at great companies with a wonderful set of skills who are passionate about the organization's mission and make that link, train those board members, set high expectations for them, and then, set them up for strong track record of success as a board member. So you have to work at it. You have to set a strategy. You have to design this. You have to find other partners that can help you identify candidates. You can't just rely on your own network of board members sitting in the boardroom today, if you really want to build that kind of a board.
I know that this is going to be a little bit of a tough question to generalize, but I'd like to try, at least for listeners who are trying to understand how they can have a more constructive board and a constructive approach to their board. What should fall, in your opinion, in your experience, generally speaking, in the board's set of influence and oversight versus staff? Like, where do you see those lines being drawn in a healthy way?
Wow, great question. The CEO has a great amount of responsibility, obviously, to lead, shepherd, guide the day-to-day work of the organization. But in almost every aspect of responsibility, there's kind of a corollary board role. So let's take strategy. Of course, the board cannot set strategy on their own. They don't have enough information. They don't have the day-to-day operational experience. They're not working with clients on the ground. But we need that diversity of experience and insight and wisdom brought to the strategy shaping process. And so it's a collaboration. Obviously, the CEO has a lot of wisdom, or they're bringing reports, landscape analyses, competitor analyses, SWOT analyses built with the team, and they're providing insight, core insight, but they're not doing it alone. And the stat or the board has an important role. So they're collaborating. In the fundraising role, the CEO obviously has a lot of responsibility to make sure that revenue targets are met, so that the expenditures can be covered. But they don't do it alone. The board has a role in opening their network, leveraging their ties to help drive dollars into the organization. I think the board probably has the most kind of core responsibility in the fiduciary oversight role, or clean, sort of this is ours. Financial sustainability, financial oversight is a critical role that boards play. You just can't take your eyes off that. You need to be seeing quarterly financial reports, if not monthly financial reports. You need a strong finance committee, a strong treasurer. There may be almost nothing more important for a board than that they're ensuring this organization is going to be around for the long haul, and they have a key responsibility there. But I mostly see the board and the CEO not as org chart one above the other, but as org chart side by side. Done rightly, the CEO and the board are really partnering together on the full range of leadership responsibilities within the organization. That's when we see organizations really thriving.
Can you help me and our listeners paint a picture around what does that quote unquote perfect, alignment between and partnership between a CEO and a board look like in practice? Like, what's the kind of desired state of that relationship look like? Maybe with some examples, or just even more like a high level thinking around that partnership in a little bit more detail.
Yeah. I'll start with trust. A lot of trust. That there needs to be a great deal of trust between the CEO and their board, and the board and their CEO. A strong sense of alignment around direction and mission and purpose. Good communication. I think boards need to be well communicated with from their CEO, and CEO communication from board to CEO can be tricky, right? If you've got a board of 12, how do you understand what the board is saying to you as an individual? And so that comes down oftentimes to the board chair CEO relationship, which is just so critical that's anchored in trust and communication and transparency and authenticity. You asked for a specific example. The best example I can give is the organization that I chair, Broadway Inspirational Voices. And we have really worked out a strong leadership model, I think, where once a month, I'm on a call with our executive director. We have an artistic director as well as that reports to the board as a nonprofit, and then our director of operations comes in. And so once a month, we have an hour-long meeting, and we're really aligning. We're getting questions answered. We're asking questions, and in that process, we're building a high amount of trust and respect for one another. Kind of having regular cadence of engagement, particularly with the board chair and the leadership, is really, really critical.
Yeah, thank you. I know that's a hard question to answer because there's not one one size fits all kind of approach. In your experience, because you've worked with so many nonprofit organizations specifically on helping to place candidates for the board, and my sense is also just generally helping them build stronger and more effective boards, what would you say from your purview is the general state of board and staff relationship right now? Like, are most nonprofits generally happy with their board but need a little bit of work? Are most nonprofits mostly dissatisfied with their board and see them more as an anchor than a force for good? Like, what's the benchmark right now? What's the average?
I can give, I think, a data point here that boards get a B minus to a C plus from their CEOs in terms of, do you have the right board in place to accomplish the mission? And that comes from board sources leading with Impact, sort of a biannual survey of governance in the nonprofit sector. So, not a failing grade, not a D. A B minus. Like, you have two kids, Eric. I don't know if your kids come home with a B minus. They probably don't get punished, but you probably also, we can do better here. Let's work on this. And I think the same can be said for most boards, the way that CEOs look towards their boards. That said, there are a lot of organizations that we come through that come to us where the CEO is very unhappy with their board. They really don't think that their board is getting the job done. And, that's troubling. That actually frustrates me, and it actually makes me sad for that CEO and that organization, because it's already a lonely job to run a nonprofit, but to have a board that doesn't feel like your partners in mission, but sort of maybe an adversary, or some sort of an accountability group that doesn't feel like we're operating with the same objectives for success. And then again, sometimes CEOs, frankly, are failing, and boards are sort of doing the work that they're supposed to do to manage that situation and maybe set up the next generation of leadership for the organization in the way that they have to do so, carefully, thoughtfully, strategically. So we definitely see it across the board. There's a lot of room for improvement. I will say that for certain, across the vast majority of nonprofits, we see there's a lot of room for improvement. And that starts with who's in the boardroom, right?
Yeah.
Designing the right board. But it also moves into training. I think nonprofit board service may be the most important responsibility that almost nobody ever gets trained for. In the workplace, you would never elevate somebody to a new role that they've never been in before and provide no training. But we do that in the nonprofit boardroom all the time. I would venture to say less than 5% of all nonprofit board members serving in the country have ever received any governance training at all. Maybe they were onboarded to the organization. They saw the strategic plan. They met the senior staff. They toured the facility. But did they receive training in how to read financial reports? Did they receive training in how to engage in fundraising efforts? Did they receive training around strategic planning and strategic tracking strategic development, that there's so many areas of responsibility that we just say, you'll figure it out. And we can do better than that. At the very least, we should be regularly training our boards to perform the roles and responsibilities for which they take responsibility when they step onto a board.
Yeah, it seems very obvious. And I'm curious to hear from your perspective, where's the burden fall on that training? Should that be coming from the nonprofits? Should that be coming from the philanthropic sector at large? Should foundations be funding open source board training materials as a service to the sector? Is it a mix of all of those things? Like, how do we fix that problem, in your opinion?
I guess I'm trying to think of where the buck stops. And I think the buck stops with the board itself, right? They typically have a governance committee who is charged with, most boards, I should say, that have broken off into committees, have a governance, maybe it's a governance and nominating committee. And it's the group that's sort of charged with ensuring that good governance is happening at that organization. And so that's the starting point for me, that if you have a governance committee, if you chair a governance committee, you take responsibility to make sure that your board is equipped to do the things that they're supposed to do. For us at Cause Strategy Partners, we've placed 3,500 board members on 1,500 boards across the United States and United Kingdom. All of them have had lots of access to good governance training at 3 or 4 stages in the process while we help them find their board. So we take responsibility for it at Cause Strategy Partners. We say, we're not interested in placing folks on a board who don't know the job, aren't committed to excellence, and may not even show up, right? We have a very different, so we're providing that. But ultimately, I think the core response, I once had a CEO that I was on the board of an organization, and the CEO used to say, look, I'm going to take care of the day-to-day of the organization. Board, I need you to take care of yourselves. And that was sort of blunt, but also quite powerful for me. Why is Sarah needing to, take care of 15 grown adults who are, pretty solid professionals in their own right, but needing to herd the cats, right? Like, can you just take care of yourselves? Can you grow the board? Can you ensure that you meet your fundraising targets? Can you make sure that you get the training that you need? And I think that's a relatively fair comment. We can step up as a board and really ensure that we are operating at the level that we should.
Hey friends, real quick before we continue today's episode. I'm Eric Ressler, founder and creative director at Cosmic. Cosmic is a creative agency purpose-built for nonprofits and mission-driven organizations. For the last 15 years, we've helped leaders like you nail your impact story and sharpen your strategy. But we're not here to just leave you with a fancy slide deck and a pat on the back. We roll up our sleeves and help you bring our ideas to life through campaigns, creative, and digital experiences. Our work together helps you earn trust, connect deeply with your supporters, and grow your fundraising and your impact. If you value the thinking we share here and want it applied to your biggest challenges, let's talk at designbycosmic.com. All right, back to today's conversation. The thing that I've noticed is that I've almost never seen an individual board member or a board at large that's just totally adversarial, that's acting in bad faith, right? These are people who are volunteers who do almost always care deeply about the mission, or at least care about the mission at some level, right? Maybe some more deeply than others. I do believe there are some people who join a board for the clout and the status and whatever, and let's put those people aside for a second. And in my experience, what I've noticed is that it seems to me like a setup problem. Like, you talk about this concept of designing the board. So it's not that people are acting in bad faith or they have bad intentions or they're intentionally trying to kind of hold an organization back. It's that the setup isn't right. Either it's the wrong people on the board, or because there's not structure and clarity around their purpose, their good faith intention to help actually ironically is holding the organization back. So I'll give you an example, and this is very close to the work that we do. We do a lot of creative work. We write mission statements and vision statements. One of the most fun things for a board to get involved of to excess in a way that usually doesn't result in a better output, just to be blunt about it. But always done in the best of faith, right? Like, they care. You can feel that they care. Or weighing in on the creative work that's being done without having the right context. So we spend a lot of time when we work with nonprofit clients where we know there's going to be board input and board, either the board chair or a board committee is going to have input, figuring out how do we set this up for success? Because when we do it that way, the board can also be super, super valuable, right? They can have great opinions, great perspectives. Sometimes they're even the ones championing this work in the first place, saying, hey, the brand is weak and we need to fix that. That is a problem. So we have an internal board champion that's kind of our the driving force behind even us getting involved in the first place. So that's what I've noticed is that if there's not clarity around the role and the responsibilities and where the feedback makes sense and where it doesn't, right? So we spend a lot of time figuring out how do we set that up. When we ask a board committee or a board chair to be involved in a creative process, let's make sure they have clarity around what we need from them and what we're going to do with that feedback and where they have influence and where they don't have influence. And so like so many things when it comes to business and communications, expectation setting seems to be the most important part. And I think what I've noticed is that because of the way the boards get built, sometimes organically, intuitively, without this training, without maybe enough structure and setup and expectation setting, there's a lot of everyone's working in good faith, but it's not constructive.
Yeah, that resonates with me. And having worked with you and your team, I know that you lead so effectively there with clarity and efficiency and effectiveness. That really resonates, Eric. Yeah, at Cost Strategy Partners, I think the key to ensuring that board members are able to fulfill, their potential, it has a lot to do with exactly what you've talked about. For us, it's first setting high expectations. As I mentioned, these are the expectations, no apologies. If you can agree to this, we ask you to sign on the dotted line and we'll be off and running. Second, training. I know I mentioned it before, providing them with the resources they need to do that job well. And then the third for us, and I don't know if all organizations have this in place, it's sort of a sense of accountability. At Cost Strategy Partners, we actually do evaluations after 1 and 2 years of service. We go back to the nonprofit and say, how's our candidate doing? And cross a range of measures that reflect the responsibilities of the organization. Nonprofits can also have sort of annual report cards where they put together the performance of each individual board member. Nominating committee chair sends those to each individual candidate, and there's a kind of a sense of accountability. Are you showing up and getting it done? But I will say, your comments made me think about sort of the idea that not every board member is the same. And, I've seen board members where it's the third rung of hell to have to sit in long board meetings. This is just not why they're there. They're zero interest in it, and they're never going to shine. But pull them aside and say, hey, we've got a real challenge in area X. And we don't understand what a brand strategy is at our organization. We have no brand identity. This is your area of expertise. Could you help us? And then they just start soaring because they're living something outside of the boardroom that they know a lot about, and they can now understand how they can drive a deliverable. It's really exciting when you can kind of see a board member lock in to the thing that they know they're passionate about and deliver value. I won't mention names, but the board I chair, we have a television, movie, Broadway producer, and we're a choir and we perform, and so we're able to connect him to the team to really fine tune and produce a level of performance that we have an amazing choir and they're ready to go. But this producer has a different sort of eye sometimes because of the work that he does. He's much more excited about engaging in that way than showing up to the quarterly board meeting, right? And so finding those ways to really plug people in where they have the ability to drive the most value is a key strategy for designing the right board.
That's a great point. So who should do that? Is that the board chair?
Board chair. Yeah, for sure the board chair. I think the board chair, ultimately, you need to know each one of your board members, what makes them tick, what their skill set is, and sort of build a strategy around engaging them in the appropriate way. Maybe not all the board members, but certainly the board members that have the capacity to make a real impact in various ways. I always say to board candidates, never join a board until you've had a conversation with the board chair. You want to know them and you want to understand what's your vision for the organization. I understand you're not the CEO. I understand you're shepherding the board's work, but in your tenure as board chair, where do you want to take this organization? And then you as a candidate can start thinking about how can I support that vision? Equally important, you're now on the board chair's radar. They know who you are, what you do, what your passion areas are, and you are now going to be, they're going to be able to delegate things to you that are in the heart of your kind of sweet spot. And so getting to know one another is really, really important. And I think it's a core board chair responsibility.
So I want to pivot now to helping our listeners who are hearing this and are inspired about this is what I want in our board. I'm an executive director and I'm not happy with my board. I'd give them a C or a B minus or worse. How have you seen organizations take a board from that state and elevate it to a more constructive and healthy state, getting closer to that A plus vision? And obviously, again, this is tough to answer because everything's going to be so dependent on the situations. But when you advise your clients and obviously you're training folks to be on the board too and helping them be the best possible board member, but what are the steps that you would be looking at if you put yourself in the shoes of an executive director with a board that's not performing to your standards?
Yep. I'd first, as the executive director, work with my board chair to either become my partner in we're going to evolve this board into a high impact group of people for this organization. Maybe you're the right board chair for that, or maybe, we could talk about who's the next board chair and, finding that right partner, because I think it's really going to need to be a partnership between the board chair and the CEO. Then as the CEO or executive director, I took a lot for 10 and a half years when I ran two organizations. I took a lot of responsibility for identifying candidates. I didn't get to select the candidates, but I could identify candidates. I was the person in the community, in the meetings, seeing these folks who had a passion for the mission, who had incredible talent or the right network or name the attribute. And I could take them back to the organization and say, hey, I'd really love for you to meet this candidate. So you can take a lot of responsibility for identifying folks who might be the right fit for your board. And then really working towards changing the, if you've got folks who are middle performers or underperformers, trying to bring on new board members with a new set of commitments and expectations and talents that will frankly start to not make room for those who are underperforming. And I've honestly seen it over and over and over again, where you bring in one or two or three high capacity candidates who are jazzed and ready to go and doing the work. And the folks who aren't are feeling a little noticed that they're not stepping up, and they usually will lead themselves into a conversation. Boards operating on all cylinders. This is a good time for me to make my exit. And so you take it. Sometimes can take 2 or 3 years to sort of remake the who sits on that board, redesign the board, if you will. But there's a lot of opportunity for an executive director to be highly influential in that process, even though they themselves are not the person voting on, who your next slate of candidates will be, if you will.
What is the right average tenure for a board position, in your opinion? Maybe let's say a standard board position versus a board chair position.
Yeah. So I'm an outlier in the nonprofit board consulting world on this one, Eric. I know a lot of people love term limits. I don't. I've seen board members who are all in on the mission and enormous contributors, and I just don't think after 6 years there should be an arbitrary date where they're no longer allowed to serve on the board when they are an incredible contributor and have all the energy left and ready to go. I'm not an advocate of that, but I know I'm an outlier. More than probably 2/3 of board consultants would be advocates of term limits. I think that the term limit is when that board candidate or that board member is no longer showing up and doing the thing and giving the very best of themselves to that organization. That's when their term should be up. But I don't know that that's driven by years. Board chair, It's an intense role, and in the present environment, it's more intense than ever. We've had quite a 5 years in the nonprofit sector to manage complexity and difficulty and resources and the like. And so, I think about it as I've told my executive director, I think I can manage one more crisis. It's kind of like we had two good crises that we had to get our way to the other side of. And, maybe there's one more that I will be able to manage, and then I might need a break.
Yeah.
5 years is a long time to serve as board chair. I've been in the role for 5 years, and I've already announced, a transition in about a year. And so 5 to 6 years is a long tenure, but I think 1 year is too short, because and I actually had a conversation last week with a nonprofit, and they have an annual election where the board chair turns over, and then they have a second vice president and a third vice president. So it's lined up for 3 years. I don't think that's an effective leadership strategy. I mean, it takes you about a year to get your sea legs, build the relationships, start to put together a plan for the board. Second year, you can really begin to activate on that plan. And third year, you can start to see some real change happening. So to me, 3 years is probably an ideal number of years to serve as a board chair. But again, you can ask other consultants and they'd have a different perspective on that.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to bring up kind of a contrarian example to
Great.
all of this. So my co-host, Jonathan Hicken, when he took his executive director role at the Seymour Marine Discovery Center, he inherited a board. And it's a little bit different than most nonprofits because his organization is associated with the university. So it's not a governance board. And so he has a little bit more power in how he shapes the board than a traditional executive director would. And what he saw when he came on is he had a very different vision for the future of the organization. And he felt that it would be basically impossible for him to execute that vision with the current board that he had. So he made the very difficult decision to disband the board entirely and start completely from scratch.
Wow.
But the point being, we did an episode on this, and he reflected on things he would have done differently in that case. But still, to this day, believes strongly it was the right call for him as executive director. Now, that's obviously a very extreme example and probably impossible for most listeners. But I do wonder, he's since built an advisory board because he doesn't have to build a governance board, and finds a lot of value in that. I'd like to hear the counter argument for that, so to speak, that I know we've talked about before, actually, around why it is important to have governance boards specifically for nonprofit organizations versus just advisory boards that are more elective in nature.
Yeah. Well, I think the IRS would weigh in here and say, if it's a 501c3, we're not giving you the choice.
Yeah.
You will have a fiduciary board. From the moment you receive your 50, you put in an application for 501c3, you have to identify 3 board members and kind of grow from there. I think governing boards are still important. They're not designed for efficiency. They're designed for fiduciary oversight and sustainability and resource generation and the like, but not necessarily for moving fast, right? You and I own a social impact company. We like to move fast. I have an advisory board. I don't have a governing board. But in the nonprofit sector, that's not the way the system is built. The system is built to say, this organization doesn't have an owner, but the closest thing we have to owner is the community. And so we need representatives from the community to take leadership of these organizations in these governing roles, not executive role, governing roles, and to provide this fiduciary guidance, leadership, oversight to make sure that the community's needs are represented. That's not built for efficiency, right? So right. I understand why executive directors can be very frustrated. I've led both kinds of organizations. In one kind of organization, I'd come up with an idea, and then you build a plan, and then you socialize it with the board chair, and then you socialize it with the right committee, and then you wait for the board meeting, and you get the board meeting to pass, and then you get to act on the plan. In my company, I come up with an idea, I can go to my computer, and I can start building it, making it happen today. So there's a difference. But it's a difference that's important because we have to remember these are organizations that belong to the community, so they need community leadership and representation. That would be my counter argument.
Yeah, I want to dig in there and get into the meat of it a little bit more, because I do think that there is a need at times, and especially in times like now, for nonprofit organizations to be able to move more quickly, right? And I think there is this healthy tension between that ability to have leadership and staff come up with ideas and be able to act on them and be able to take big bets at times, even if there's a chance of failure, and maybe especially if there's a chance of failure, because that means we really are taking a big bet without the repercussions. And at the same time, where's the line between that kind of more entrepreneurial spirit and being reckless with community funds and for community outcomes? I mean, we could do an entire episode on this at some level.
But
Yeah, your
well, I
thoughts,
was
please.
just going to say, I think there's a couple things you can do to create that efficiency, particularly in moments like that. One
Yeah.
is you have an executive committee, and so you don't always have to bring the full board along. If you have a timely matter that needs a quick decision, you've got your 4 or 5 officers of the organization that can move quickly.
Yeah.
Another technique that I love is to, instead of having a very complex strategic plan that has a 3-year plan with lots of activities and timelines and benchmarks and milestones, you could just have a strategic framework and say, we're trying to do these 3 things, which provides a lot of flexibility for how you do those 3 things for senior leadership. They're moving in the direction of the plan without sort of feeling constrained by the very detailed, enumerated activities within the plan.
I think that last point's really important, because that's where I've seen things go really south, is when the worst case board scenarios that I've seen are when board members are unengaged on the really important things and overly engaged on the minutia of how those really important things happen. I mean, that's the exact opposite of what we want and what you're describing, right? So I think what I've seen and what I'm hearing you say is that get really clear on the vision, get really clear on the big picture strategy, but give reasonable flexibility and autonomy to the core team and the staff and the executive director to execute against that vision as they best see fit, doing the work, day to day on the ground.
And I might even just say, instead of reasonable flexibility, maybe liberal flexibility.
Yeah.
Substantial flexibility, right? That it's not about constraining your senior leadership. It's about providing guidance and a level of oversight, but mostly support and making sure we're doing as a board what we can to further that vision, to further that strategy. That support role is always so critical. That's what a board really needs to be doing. How do I support this organization in this direction, not constrain it?
Right. That makes sense. So as we wrap up here, I know it's been a big year in the social impact space. There's been a lot of change. The landscape has changed rapidly. I imagine there's been a lot of motion and turnover and change as it relates to nonprofits and their boards and their board chairs and all of that. Despite all of that, I'd be really curious to hear, what are you seeing forward-looking, future-looking, that's getting you really inspired right now, that's helping you get up every day, even amongst things being really difficult, and feeling motivated to continue towards this work, to continue working in this sector? What are those things for you right now?
I think high capacity people like to deal with challenges. High capacity people don't like to sit on boards that are rubber stamp boards and attend 4 meetings a year and maybe 1 committee and go to the gala and sell some tickets and call it a day. High capacity people are motivated when a complex challenge shows up. And they're motivated when they need to sort something out in a manner that's very critical and timely. And they've got partners in that work to do that together. If we have high capacity people on boards that are, again, trusting one another, communicating with each other, and working well together, there's a different level of engagement. And I have to tell you, in the challenging environment we've been operating in for a while now, I have not seen the boards that I'm connected to, any board members backing away and saying, this is getting hard. Oh, I didn't sign up for this. An organization I'm involved with has had to do substantial layoffs in the recent environment. And I didn't see any board members say, well, that's not what I signed up for. I saw board members lean in and strategize and want to solve these challenges and problems and have very strategic discussions. So that's what I'm inspired by. I think an environment like this actually creates the opportunity for us to engage high capacity board members in a way that they might not otherwise be engaged. And that sort of leadership will get us through the challenges that we're facing. And I'm really genuinely inspired by that.
Rob, I think that's a great place to wrap up today. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we do wrap up, though, I'd love to give you a chance just to share anything that you'd like our listeners to dig into. I know that you're an author of an amazing book. Yeah, this is your time to just kind of plug everything that you'd like to for our listeners.
I'll plug two things. First, Eric, working with you and your team at Cosmic, you all helped us build, design an incredible brand identity and brand strategy and a website that has stood the test of time and has been instrumental in reflecting the level of professionalism I know we deliver in our work. And now you helped us communicate that level of professionalism. And we genuinely did not have the internal team to build that set of resources. And so, I'll plug you. I know you don't need me to or want me to, but I did.
I appreciate it. I'll take it. Thank you, Rob.
If you edit it out, that's up to you. And then the second thing is two things. Well, actually, I wrote a book called Becoming a Causey, Champion Your Cause Through Nonprofit Board Leadership. And it's everything we've learned in 11 years at Cause Strategy Partners around how to find your cause, how to find an organization serving that cause, how to vet that organization, then how to begin the conversation around leading to board service, how to show up when you're being vetted for the board, when you've been elected to board, how to really understand the role and responsibilities. It's the full roadmap. So if anyone's listening who's really thinking maybe a nonprofit board is right for me, this is the best we have to offer. It's the roadmap for finding a board seat from point A to point Z. It's called Becoming a Causey, and it's on Amazon and all other places like that. And then the second thing is, if you're a nonprofit leader and you could benefit from a board partner in helping identify candidates who come trained and with commitments in place around serving effectively, we would love to hear from you. Cause Strategy Partners is our website, and Board Lead is our signature program. And you can reach out to us through the website, and we'll start talking with you to see if our Board Lead network is right for you. There's no cost to nonprofits to participate. We have 1,500 nonprofits in the network today, but we're always looking for new nonprofit partners who are doing great work and maybe great places for us to send our terrific candidates.
And I will pay it back to Rob here and say that Rob and his team are excellent and highly recommended, and get the Cosmic stamp of approval with no hesitation. So any listeners who are interested in improving their board situation or looking for candidates, definitely consider Rob and his team at Cause Strategy an awesome opportunity. Rob, thank you so much. This was great. Really appreciate your time today, and hopefully we'll have you back on again in the future.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Eric.
If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe, or even leave us a comment. It really helps. Thank you. And thank you for all that you do for your cause and for being part of the movement to move humanity and the planet forward.